Okay.
You're on mute?
I am. I was. All right, just back on the half hour, so let's begin. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunatu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavadi Dhamastu Mavit Vishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, so let's get into today's questions. All right, the first one that came through. What role does the path of karma play in one's spiritual growth? Okay. So the reference here, for those interested, is the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 30. That gives a blueprint of karma yoga. So karma yoga is one of the 3 spiritual disciplines. They are all designed for the same fundamental purpose, which is to shift the focus off the ego. So how does karma yoga do that? So all action is performed not just by the body, but by the entire personality. The body, the mind, the gross intellect, and the subtle intellect. Everything participates in our actions. So when you are practicing karma yoga, what are you actually doing? So the body is performing its obligations. So when we use the term obligation, we've discussed this at length, so I won't go into it here. What we're referring to are those actions that are a natural part of the role that you have adopted, and it's those actions that are necessary to achieve your goals. So roles and goals, broadly speaking, rather than simply doing what you want to do. So the body is performing its obligations. What's the mind doing? The mind is surrendering to the ideal that you have set. So an ideal is a goal that lies beyond the ego. We think of an ideal as having 2 aspects. One is that it serves a wider community, that the action that I'm performing benefits others somehow. And the other aspect of an ideal is that it has a growth dimension to it, that I'm growing beyond my current ego perspective on the world, growing beyond my immature limitations. And again, it's surrendering to the ideal rather than doing what it wants. When we talk about surrendering, what are we surrendering? We're surrendering the mind's demands. I want this for me, or the ego's demands. And we're surrendering the claims of knowledge. We each have our own individual perspective on the world. When we don't recognize that we have our own individual perspective, we think that we are right in what we believe, without recognizing there's a whole lot more information that needs to come in to complete what we currently know. So this arrogating sense of I know, we also surrender that. And this is the thing, we're surrendering it to the ideal. The gross intellect is used to direct the mind and body towards that ideal. So it's not just enough to have an ideal, you have to actively be directing your thoughts and your activities towards it. That's what the gross intellect does. And the role of the subtle intellect is to conceive the underlying source of all activity, that pure consciousness or that self. So when you look at all of these aspects, you're taking the focus off the ego. You're performing your obligation rather than acting according to likes and dislikes, your personal preferences. Your mind is surrendering to a higher ideal rather than getting its own egocentric demands met. The gross intellect is also focused on the ideal rather than trying to figure out ways and means of satisfying selfish desire. And of course, the subtle intellect is keeping the thought off the ego entirely and on the transcendental. So what's the role of Karma Yoga? It's exactly this. Each of these aspects is a shift of the attention off the ego. And this is how growth occurs. As you think, so you become. If you're continuing to live in that environment where you have suspended or just shifted away from the ego's perspective and the ego's demands, gradually over time, those ego limitations begin to degrade and fall away. So its role is to shift the attention off the ego. And it's specifically useful for those of us who have a lot of desires, who are very active, who want to do a lot of stuff, because it's using action in your field of activity. Get out there and do stuff. You've got lots of desires. You can't sit still. Good, go work. It's also useful for those of us who have a reasonably balanced mind and intellect. We like to think our way through things and analyze. We don't want to make choices randomly. We like to have a clear set of reasons why we do something. But at the same time, we also feel our way through life. You know, if it doesn't feel right, I'm not going to do it. And yeah, it just really feels good. So I'm just going to do it, even though I'm not sure why. So when we have a sort of a mixture of both temperaments, Karma Yoga is also good because both the mind and the intellect are being addressed here. The mind is surrendering, yes, I want to help, I want to serve. And yeah, I want to grow. So the mind is being catered to. It likes what it's getting into. And the intellect is also being engaged here. It's thinking about the ideal. It's analyzing and questioning how to get there. What are my obligations? And it's also reflecting or contemplating on the self, capital S. Just sort of a brief overview of Karma Yoga. So if there's any clarifications to that, we can take them up.
Glenn, in the aspect of surrendering the idea of I know, is that where, so you'll set, let's say it's a project and to achieve a higher ideal, is that in regard to saying sometimes things don't work out and then you surrender to that higher power and say, I don't know what's the best outcome, this is how it has to be, or something like that? Like how do you make that element practical?
Yep, that's definitely an aspect of it. It's remembering that we have choice of action, we don't have choice of outcome. And, you know, we try to achieve a particular outcome, it doesn't happen, and so there's a sense of failure. Well, it could be the best thing. And there are so many other streams of causation coming in that we are unaware of that may be influencing the outcome. And this could be the best of all possible outcomes. And I'm calling it failure because it wasn't what I wanted to happen. So when you go into Karma Yoga proper, there's no attachment to a particular result. There is a particular result that we're trying to achieve. We know that. But we also suspend that ego. Well, this is the best result for the world, for the cosmos. We don't know that. The other aspect of surrender is to recognize that you're operating in an environment of ignorance. And that's really where the subtle intellect comes in. How am I capable of performing action? How am I capable of experiencing anything? Here I am in this world performing action as part of a larger project, and the whole thing is just, it's like a dream. It's the same thing as a dream. How is it real? What's real about it? Where does it come from? Where's it going? All of these sort of deep philosophical questions. The connection to of the subtle intellect to the self is a way of remembering just how much we don't know. So the element works there as well. The for that first aspect of, there's another element of I know, which is the ego's knowing. What do I mean by that? The mind has its own demands. And essentially the mind's demands are saying, I know what is right. I should have this. You think of the perspective of a very young child. Offer her broccoli. She pushes it away. It's bad. There's a sense in which she's saying, I know that that is the wrong thing to eat. You as an adult know it's the right thing to eat, very healthy, the immature perspective doesn't know, or put it this way, the mind cannot see what's right and wrong. The mind only has feelings and desires. The intellect can. And so if we operate on the mind, we're essentially pushing the likes and dislikes as the I know what is right, I know what is wrong, I know how I should act. So we're suspending the likes and dislikes. And the story of the prince who goes on the hunt is a good one there. He has an accident, loses his toe. Second time he goes hunting, he gets captured by the tribe. They go to sacrifice him to their god. And when they see that he's an imperfect specimen because he's got no toe, they cast him aside and he runs back to the palace. So when he lost his toe, he called that a terrible outcome. From the perspective of, I am my body, that is a terrible outcome. But when you take a broader perspective, he gained his whole life. So the surrendering to the, if you like, the flow of nature. We don't know what is happening. What we can have a hint of is that nature always helps. We always use this example, cut yourself, immediately forces come together to fix it. Maybe that same kind of healing, helping energy pervades the entire cosmos. Maybe the universe is doing everything it can to offer you positive opportunities, and we just miss them because we are short-sighted. I don't know the best thing, but the cosmos does. I don't know how to fix a cut. I can't tell you how to make a cut heal up and become good skin again, but my body knows. I leave it up to my body, suspend my own, Same thing with the entire cosmos. I don't know how it functions, but I do believe, I have trust that there is an underlying intelligence and it's moving in the right direction. Any other clarifications to this?
So, Glenn, when we say, so on one hand, we have this like self-development ideal, and on the other hand, we have this other ideal for the karma yoga. So how do we, like when there's a conflict between the two, like how do we resolve the conflict?
So when you say the conflict, just want to be clear, the conflict is between your self-development ideal and the ideal of karma yoga, meaning, say, the outcome you're trying to achieve, like I want to build a children's hospital.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How would they be in conflict? What would bring them into conflict?
Like I guess, like for example, let's say I want to build a children's hospital. That might require that, like, for a few weeks I have to pull like all-nighters, but then that might mean then I can't study.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings up the second question that came through. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay. Any more further clarifications to this specific before we move on? Okay. Right. How do I determine what to do when there's a conflict between the paths of knowledge and action? For example, having to stay up late to meet a goal versus going to bed to awake early and study. So you've got a conflict on action. The conflict is not on the ideals. The ideal is one. The ideal is self-development. The conflict is what action to perform. So there's a basic amount of stuff that you need to do up front. And it's being clear on what your goals and ideals are. So, overall, what am I trying to achieve? Okay, overall, I'm trying to achieve self-development. And you can define that in different ways, but let's just call it suspending and going beyond the ego, just for shorthand. Anytime you come up against a conflict or a challenge, it indicates that you've found a growth edge in your personality. That's what the external challenges mean, growth edge in the personality. And so the fact that you have to resolve this is actually an indication that you're in your self-development ideal here. So that's the first thing to recognize. Once you're clear on what your goals and ideals are, build the children's hospital and self-development, it's a matter of establishing priorities. So when we were talking about karma yoga, we were talking about the body performing actions that are its obligations. And we describe or discuss this in terms of your nature. So if you are going to say, right, I'm going to build a children's hospital. Now, you're not going to put brick upon brick. That's not the part that you're doing. Okay, so what is the part that you're doing? The part that you're doing in that will be according to, again, this is an ideal situation, will be according to your nature. Right now, you actually might be the bricklayer. That might be your swadharma. I am a tradie. I know that really well. You might be a project manager for the bricklayers. You might be the fundraiser. You might be the PR person. There's a whole set of different roles in that. You might be that number one, the very top, who's leading the project. The first thing in terms of understanding your obligations is to ensure to the best of your ability that you put yourself in the role that suits your temperament. Now, the reason for that is that when you are asked by your obligations to do things that conflict with your likes and dislikes and conflict with your other obligations, it's going to be easier to manage. Right? If you have to pull all-nighters because you are, let's say you're designing the schematics of the building, architecture or electrician or something like that. If you love, doing that kind of thing, pulling an all-nighter is not going to be as difficult a job. If I have to give up my morning study, at least it's for something that I love doing. And so what's happening when you're in that situation is the conflict is reduced, that dissonance, that agitation. So establishing your priorities within your obligations is an important aspect. So this is the first thing to start to look at. Am I in my swadharma? Am I doing things when I'm pulling all-nighters that I actually like to do anyway? Now, where will I put this? I'll put it here. What you want to be doing is playing the long game. Self-development is a long-term project. It's going to be going on when the hospital is built and it's full of children and it's full of staff and all the newspaper articles are finished and all the applause and everything else is forgotten, your self-development will still be going on. So when we talk about playing the long game, it means understanding how long this is going to last for. Now, if you have put yourself in a situation where it's not so much a project, but a lifestyle, then you need to look at resetting your obligations by redefining your roles and goals. Okay, I built that children's hospital, and then I took on a job of overseeing all the charity projects in my state, which is requiring me to be pulling all-nighters as part of my regular routine duties. Now, if you've got to then understand what your priorities are. So when we talk about priorities and obligations, in this context, they become synonyms. My priority is my self-development. Okay, so how do I get there? Well, 3 disciplines of study and reflection, devotion and gratitude, and selfless service. If you are prioritizing correctly, essentially what you're doing is you know where they all fit. I'm a very active person. I need to make sure that I've got plenty of work to do. But I'm also an analytical person, and that morning study period, I find, I know from experience, it resets and it sets the tone for my entire day. And when I'm doing it, everything is improved. Relationships are improved, my study is improved, my discipline with food and exercise is improved, because I'm contacting those higher values. You know, there's that quote from a Western philosopher, I forget who it is. Every morning I bathe my intellect in the Bhagavad Gita. A beautiful way to think about it. You know, you get up in the morning and you bathe your body, you clean off the dirt. You get up in the morning and you bathe your intellect. You just clean off the dirt, and it feels better and you function better. So if you know that that's the case, then you need to put your morning study into its proper place. So actually, this is an important distinction that we need to understand. What are the regular routine duties that are coming with my karma yoga, my path of action? And what are the occasional special duties? Okay, this children's hospital project, it's going to be a 2-year project. And then it will finish. And out of those 2 years, I can expect maybe, every month, I'm going to have to pull a couple of all-nighters just as certain deadlines come and then need to be met. So there are occasional special duties, across a finite timeline. Am I okay with that? Does that violate my priorities of being able to get up and study in the morning? You might say, yes, it's totally okay. You might say, no, it's not. The problem, of course, is that rigidity looks like conviction. So where am I being rigid and where am I being true to my conviction? So what does rigidity look like? What does rigidity feel like? So rigidity is tamas. We are fanatically attached to something. So what you can start to do is to look at the effects of rigidity, just as a general investigation. And when you're rigid, what does it look like? What happens to yourself? What happens to relationships? What happens within your environment when you're rigid?
I think you would have conflict with others.
Yep, conflict with others. And that conflict with others is characterized by an inner conflict as well. if you are clear on your conviction, when others are in conflict with you, how can you do this? You've got to do this. This is what you should be doing. They're in conflict with you. Your reaction to them is not to be frustrated, angry. If your own reaction to that is frustration, anger, etc., then it's probably an indication that now you're in your ego. But when you are clear in your conviction, there's a calmness, there's a peace. Take the analogy of parent and child. You've got shopping and errands to run, and you spend a little bit of time at the playground with the child, and then you look at your watch, we have to leave. And the child is now in conflict with you because the child wants to stay. And the child says, no, let's stay. I want us to stay at the park. You're not going to get agitated. Okay, ideal situation. You're not going to get agitated and feel like you've got this now tense, conflict-ridden relationship I've got to manage. You know that you're not staying at the park. You've got other things to do. No, sweetheart, we need to go. And so that's a good way to think about it. When others are in conflict with you because you're, sticking with something, you don't have this arrogant attitude of, well, it's my obligation, I'm going to do it anyway. This is your problem. Because again, that sense of, in inverted commas, peace can come from that same tamas. It seems like peace. No, I'm just staying true to my conviction. You don't like it? Well, that's your problem. It's a lack of empathy. When you're dealing with a child, you don't treat her that way. You don't say, well, that's your problem. You want to be at the park? It's nothing to do with me. We've got to go and do some shopping. You care about the child and the fact that she's frustrated and she's agitated. And you deal with her in that way. And so when you are in conflict with the environment, when you're truly in your conviction, it's sattva. And sattva brings with it a natural empathy and care for the fact that the people in your environment now are frustrated. It's unpleasant for you. I get it, but I'm sorry. I can't make a different choice. This really is my. So start to look at how we relate to others. If we're in an agitated form of conflict, rajas, or if we're in a sort of sense of superiority, well, you don't understand where I'm coming from. It's a higher place. Bad luck for you. Again, it's ego, superiority complex. But if you find that you are unmoved, I need to do this, but yes, there's a care, there's an empathy, there's a connection with the people that are in conflict with you, like a parent-child relationship, then it's probably clearer that you're being more conviction than rigid. So in terms of figuring out whether we are being rigid or whether we are being within our conviction, we want to look for the ego. And so, as I said, that the way that the environment reacts with us and the way that we react with the environment is one way to do it. But also start looking for underlying desires and beliefs. What do I want to do? Forget what I think my obligation is. What do I want to do? If I was functioning purely on likes and dislikes, I want to stay up late. I love doing this drafting work. And, to be honest, my morning study has been becoming a bit stagnant. I want to stay up late. Or it could be the other way around. I want to get up and study in the morning. So what you're looking for now is just the pure what I want out of it. So you're looking for the ego. Now, just because you want it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. But it's just beginning to identify just what the personal desires or the personal likes and dislikes are. The reason that's important is that if you find that your intellect says I should do this, forget that and go to bed early. If it's the same as what you like to do, little yellow flag should come up. If they are in opposition, then it's actually an indication that actually I'm going against what I prefer here. So yeah, this could be an indication that it's the intellect functioning rather than just likes and dislikes. And as we touched on already, the ego shows itself where we resist and resent the environment. So once we've found those areas, start to look for the, again, it's the idea of underlying beliefs. What happens if I stay up late? Well, if I stay up late, I won't be able to get up early and study in the morning. From there, start playing the so what game. Okay, so I won't be able to get up early tomorrow morning. So what? Well, I'll miss a morning study session. So what? What does it mean if you don't get up tomorrow morning and study? And try to get to bedrock. And, I'm being unspiritual, let's say. It as a, if I don't study tomorrow morning, I'm being unspiritual. And then start doing the same sort of process that we've touched on. What do you mean by spiritual? What does spiritual mean? Spiritual means stepping out of ego. So what are you doing instead? Okay, I'm doing this project. Well, what role does this project have in your spirituality? So you might then start to arrive at the conclusion that, yeah, if I'm staying up late, it's because I'm performing karma yoga. So I'm being spiritual. So the idea that if I don't study tomorrow morning, I'm not being spiritual. I'm just performing one spiritual practice instead of another. So there could be another underlying thought here. A rigidity, an attachment to a schedule, an attachment to study. It's the only way to be spiritual. And in the grand scheme of things, if it's something like twice a month for a finite period of 2 years, it can accommodate that. I mean, take the example of the Swami. He flies no longer, but used to fly around the world and study and teach. And when he's on a long flight in a strange time zone, he's not going to get up and force himself to get up at 4 a.m. and do his writing. It doesn't make any sense. Well, he's being unspiritual then, isn't he? Okay, well, no, because it's part of his karma. It's part of his work to fly, but it by necessity means that he steps out of his usual schedule. So if I stay up late, I'm stepping out of my routine. I'm unable to perform that one action of studying in the morning or at the usual time. Instead of getting up at 4:30 and studying, I have to get up at 6:30 or 7:30, and then I'm going to do my study. But I have to do it at 4:30. Why? Well, Brahma Muhurta. And what happens if you don't do it at Brahma Muhurta? The day's wasted. Okay, is it? Is it wasted? Okay, so ask and answer these questions and then challenge them. And same thing for the other way around. What happens if I go to sleep early? I'll be able to study in the morning. Good. And then it might end. Again, there's an indication that perhaps that's your driving motivation. But what happens if I sleep early is, well, I won't be able to complete this project tonight. Well, then what? Well, we might miss the deadline, which is tomorrow. So what? So what? And as you continue to play the so what game, you'll see two things. One is the external consequences, and two is the underlying meaning that you're deriving from it. If I don't study, I'm not being spiritual. That's what not studying one day out of the week means. say it out loud to yourself and see how it sounds to your intellect. Does it make sense? So once you start to identify some of those underlying beliefs, it can become clear where the rigidity is coming in and what sort of flexibility there is. And of course, the difficulty or the challenge here is that there really is nobody else who can answer the question for you as to whether or not to, dismiss the late evenings or not. It'd be lovely if there was an objective answer out there that you could just, pay someone to give you. But really it is that internal reflection to find out, where am I being flexible and within my conviction, and where am I being rigid? But yeah, looking for the external and the internal causes and effects, the anxieties and the frustrations and the underlying thought patterns that drive everything. But I think I want to come back to the final point of remembering that if you get it wrong, you're still right. In the sense that this whole discussion that we're having with ourselves is from the perspective of how am I maximizing my spiritual growth? And if you make the wrong decision and decide, let's say the wrong decision, you only realize this after the fact. You make the wrong decision of saying no to any of those late nights. I'm going to be 100% with my study. If you make that decision and then 2 years down the track, you realize, actually it was, on reflection and seeing things from hindsight, I should have pulled those all-nighters. It hasn't violated your self-development goal. You did it for your self-development. Okay, a little distorted here and there because of some biases, but the whole thing was taking place in how am I going to maximize my self-development? And you get it wrong, and now you're in a different situation. You're starting from new experience. And when you're faced with it again, you'll act differently and you'll act better. So it's always a progression of information, experience, knowledge, wisdom. So again, just sort of have that faith. The process is ongoing. I've got heaps of time, inshallah, but okay, we may not. But for as much time as I have, I'm just going to keep moving forward and correct where I see I'm incorrect and make the best choice that I have at the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, the clarifications.
Then, is it possible to help someone else who is rigid about their schedule, whether it's exercise or whether it's whatever they do, and they believe it's for good, and at face value it all looks good, but you can sense a rigidity.
Yeah, you can. Think of it more in terms of creating a conducive environment. I saw a quote recently: if the plant is not flourishing, you don't fix the plant, you fix the soil. So if you're in an environment with somebody who is, as you say, rigid in their attachment to a schedule, the problem with rigidity is that it's very resistant to advice. So what you probably should not do is do it directly. I've noticed you're quite rigid with your schedule. Maybe you should think about being more flexible. I mean, hey, try it, good luck. Unless, there's an opening of a receptivity. If it looks like the person has said something which indicates self-awareness, then maybe conversation is an appropriate thing to do. But I would probably say, generally speaking, it's a matter of leading by example and demonstrating to the best of your ability that fine balance point between conviction, routine, and schedule, and fanatic attachment and rigidity. So that's one way, is simply to do it yourself in their environment and let them see it. And your own thinking and intuition will guide you as to the best way to do that. You know the person, you know their temperament, the other, so again, depends on the levels of receptivity. The other thing you can do is just be curious about the effects of their rigidity. So if someone is rigid in something that they're doing, the effects will show up in their personality. And if the person, and let's take the example that we've been describing, let's say, a person has another, occasional special obligation, which is going to mean a very late night. And you can see that they're getting agitated about it. That might be an opportunity to draw their attention to the fact that agitation, because you can't get up early and study, arises from attachment. Now, again, when you tell someone something, it can be resistance. So approaching with maybe curiosity instead. And again, how you do that is dependent on the relationship, but I'm curious. You seem agitated. What's up? I'm about to study in the morning. And then find some way of drawing their attention to agitation arises from attachment. It could be curiosity, it could be humor. Oh, you people are the same, you're all attached to your schedule, whatever. But again, the receptivity needs to be there even for that level of curiosity. And in rare cases, you can just straight out call it as you see it. You're doing with an attitude of, I know this person's intelligent enough to see what I'm talking about. They'll take it or leave it as they see fit. You're too rigid about and too attached to your schedule. And this is what makes me see it. I've seen this and this, and you're saying that you want to be spiritual, but what I'm seeing is fanatic attachment. Now, I could be wrong, you take it or leave it, and then you got to trust that, you got to do that with zero attachment and be aware that there may be a negative response from the other person. And there may be a period of time where there's tension between you, but you might also recognize that that kind of intervention is necessary. And there is some kind of trust that the person, even if they reject and resist me now, I think they're probably going to go away and in the silent moments on their own, maybe they will give a bit of thought to this. So that's the sort of, that's again, they use that word intervention, is when it seems it's really necessary to point this out because there's some more serious consequences that need to be addressed. And I've tried the subtler methods, they don't seem to be working. So here I'm going to give this a crack. So yes, you can help, but and like all help, it should be done without any attachment to the result because there's no guarantees.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of any description? Okay, if not, we did have one more come through. Okay, how does one prepare for life situations without having a pessimistic view? For example, in relationships, it is possible that it may or may not work. How do you enter situations without expectations of either? And what does it mean to be prepared whilst going through life's experiences? So pessimism is a function of the ego. You can think of it as that arrogant claim of I know bad things are going to happen. So having a blindly optimistic view is the opposite. I know that only good things are going to happen. Okay, well, now life is a series of opposites. So the way to drop any kind of expectations, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, let's think of them as limited expectations, is through an accurate assessment. So what you're looking to do is develop an acceptance of the way things are by accurately assessing. So there's always going to be uncertainty in any endeavor that you engage in. And relationships is a great example, because you're dealing with another human being who is, for a start, you don't know. You know the surface, but not the depth. And they are changing over time. So what you know today is not going to be what you know later on. Circumstances are changing, or the rest of it. So including uncertainty in your assessment is essential. So the first part of it is, to mitigate potential losses. Okay, I'm getting into a relationship. Okay, I've recognized I have that need. Who's this person who's in front of me, who there's a potential for a relationship here? Do we make sense? Okay, there's an immediate, say, attraction and say at the physical level. And for that reason, I feel like I want to rush into a relationship. You're not mitigating any potential loss by rushing in that way. So the assessment starts with your own nature. What am I like? What are my values? Where am I going in my life? What am I doing? And importantly, what are my needs? Material, physical, emotional, intellectual, moral, spiritual. What are the needs that I have in or from a relationship? So that's the basics of any kind of spiritual practice, of understanding your temperament. So when you've got a clear understanding of what your needs are, then you simply look at your environment and see which of those needs are going to be met and to what extent. So the physical need met, emotional, intellectual, our values, one's a raging carnivore and the other one's a vegan. Okay, does that matter? One is a workaholic and the other one's, most important thing is the weekends. Does that matter? One loves politics and the other one doesn't care about what's going on in the world. Does that matter? One has self-development as a goal and one doesn't. Does that matter? So look at what your needs are, and then you're mitigating potential loss by making sure that you're choosing as reasonably as possible within those needs. When you know you've done that, then okay, I've made a reasonably good choice here. I've accepted that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, 10 years, but I've made the best choice that I possibly could. So that is going to go some way to minimizing that pessimism, because you've made the wisest choice you possibly could. The acceptance of uncertainty is to the next key element of that. And it's figuring out what it is that you're afraid of. what is the worst that can happen? She leaves me for someone else, or we stop relating well and just start having a cold or angst-ridden relationship, or it gets boring, or it's whatever. When you say this phrase, relationship may not work out, what does that mean? What is the worst that can happen? What does that say about you? What does it say about the relationship? So what you're looking for is the underlying anxiety or fear, and then sit with that. It's a matter of developing self-awareness. The thing I'm most afraid of in a relationship is that it gets boring. Okay, what does boring mean? Define it, describe it. What does it feel like when the relationship gets boring? What happens? So it's a matter of sitting very much with the thing that you are anxious about or afraid of, and looking for the underlying beliefs that make that the worst possible thing. The reason this is so important is because part of the way that these anxieties function is that they tend to be self-fulfilling prophecies. If we are anxious about something happening, we are hyper-focused on that, and it actually distorts our thinking and distorts our behavior to actually bring that closer. So if the thing you're most afraid of is it gets boring, then you need to be aware that that may actually be leading you towards that end point. So identifying the underlying beliefs and the fears is an important aspect of getting rid of that pessimism. The other element of that is to look at, again, it's that idea of mitigating the losses, is to look at what you can do to address that. So one thing is to address the underlying belief or the thought. Yeah, we question it. But the other thing is to say, well, what things can I put in place to ensure that doesn't happen? Well, one thing I can put in place is to find someone who has one or two key interests the same as me. I love hiking. I'm out in nature at least once a week, and every month I do a 2-day hike, etc. It's one of my things, and I'm always up for a hike in the bush or in the mountains. I never say no. I always love it. Okay, so if I meet someone who has a keen interest in the same way, there's always going to be some place where we can meet. Worst, no matter how bad things get, whenever I say, want to go on a hike, we go on a hike. There is something that mitigates that potential outcome. The other thing to do is, and this is really this is part of making an accurate assessment, is to balance with optimism. Look at what you do have. So it's a sense that it's essentially a gratitude practice for all of your life circumstances. Yes, specifically for, say, the relationship, if that's the area that you're looking at, but for all of your life circumstances. An attitude of gratitude will balance the pessimism out. And also recognizing that no matter where I get to, I'll be able to handle it. It doesn't mean it's going to be pleasant. but there is a sense of self-belief that if it happens that I get to the situation that I don't want, I'll be able to handle it. And again, where does that sense come from? It comes from sitting with that worst case scenario. What's the worst that can happen? It gets boring. So what? What does that mean? How am I going to deal with it? What will I do? So it's knowing that there is a way to deal with the situation internally, externally, when you get there. But fundamentally, I think the way to manage the pessimism is to know that life is this flow or this fluctuation of positive, negative, likes, dislikes, good, bad, that nothing lasts, everything changes. And so long as you have the goal of self-development included in your life, when you come across challenges, you're going to move through them. So a relationship gets boring and stagnant. Now, if both parties, if neither of them have a goal of self-development, then it stays there and potentially gets worse. If both have a goal of self-development, then there's an ability to be honest about the situation and to find ways to manage it and move through it. So your own growth must be the priority in any situation that you get into. It allows you to move through challenges in a different way. So be clear and convinced on your own self-development. And I was touching on this earlier about the needs from a partner. If you have self-development as your own primary goal, recognize just how beneficial it is to choose someone who has that as well. No one can tell you what your needs are, but just reflect on what it would be like to be with someone who does have self-development as a goal and someone who doesn't. And the ease that comes with two people having that as a goal. So that's obviously not going to work when, that's only for the example that's given. But the idea of pessimism is much more wide than that. Your own self-development and your commitment and your conviction that, yes, this is my primary focus. The moment you reconnect back to your growth goal, then actually challenging situations no longer seem to be as threatening. They are now seen as opportunities for growth. Okay, any clarifications? Okay. Brings us to our hour. Thanks very much. Appreciate the attendance and the questions and so forth. So have a great weekend, and I'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Adios.